Ever wondered what having a home arcade would be like? Wonder no more. Watch my channel to find out how I built my arcade from nothing to what it is now. Watch gameplay videos featuring tips and tricks, arcade game repair videos, high score runs, innovative builds, and much more. It's Arcade Sunday. I recently realized that some of my viewers may never have actually visited a real arcade back in the 80s. And I'm not talking about this kind of establishment. This is what I call Redemption City. All of these so-called games were designed to swallow as many coins as possible, as quickly as possible, dangling the carrot of cheap prizes in exchange for reels of tickets that you won while pushing buttons randomly, honestly. In any event, real arcades were very different. I grew up in a coastal city, which was a very popular tourist destination. There were at least 7 very large video game arcades within a 2-kilometer radius of each other, all of which were always packed, especially on weekends, and even more so during peak tourist seasons. The 3 largest arcades were Funland on North Beach, Space World on West Street Promenade, and Space Games toward the end of West Street. To me, the mid and late 80s was the true hardcore arcade game era. By this time, there were already tons of well-established older games, example Asteroids, Space Invaders, Pac-Man, etc., mixed into the rows of newer games, for example Outrun, Raiden, Street Fighter 2. There were sometimes even 2 or 3 of the same game, just to keep crowds down to a minimum. We were lucky enough that this old and new mix lasted late into the 80s, but by the early 90s, most of the large arcades had closed down or had significantly downsized, making way for shopping malls, clothing stores, and other less interesting establishments. In the earlier days, most arcades were dark, hot, smoke-filled and dirty, and you would have to watch your back for pickpockets and chewing gum stuck to your shoes. But thankfully, I did not have any bad experiences myself. It was easy for me to look past these negative aspects of arcade life somehow, and simply experience the magic of the games themselves, and the camaraderie of the fellow arcade patrons. There was nothing like beating a high score and entering your initials, and then coming back later to the machine to find your score still at number 1, or if someone else had beaten it, you'd have to try again to win back your title. Another great aspect of arcade games back then was the 1-1 challenge. 1-1 challenge refers to a single player game, but played by 2 players alternating after each life. This aspect is unique to arcade games, in that most games these days are simultaneous multiplayer, and is nothing quite like the blow-by-blow head-to-head challenge that the 1-1 challenge brought to almost every single-player game. A very clever innovation which really brought out the best of the 2 players battling each other in alternating fashion. One of the biggest reasons for visiting the arcades back then though was the state of home technology. At that time, I grew up with an XT and early AT PCs, a Sinclair ZX81, Atari 2600 played on a black and white TV, so the games themselves were light years ahead of what was playable at home. Of course, this was to change years later as the home market took over, surpassing the arcade scene, technologically anyway, and allowed people to play in the comfort of their own homes. I guess this is the reason I built my own arcade. There is a very large and growing fraternity of people who have recreated their own arcade experiences at home, either by collecting or restoring original game cabinets, or by using DIY skills and modern emulation techniques. There is also a wide selection of Raspberry Pi images catering to retro classic games in general, with an exponential number of enthusiasts who design and develop these images. Yet another option is a growing selection of reimagined, scaled versions of some of the original classic machines, developed and licensed by a company called Arcade 1UP in the USA, for those who just want to play the games, rather than getting into the restoration project side of things. You could even just play on a PC or Mac using an emulator and a joypad. Either way you choose to play, and regardless of whether you lived through the arcade era or not, you should be able to enjoy the charm and the challenge of classic arcade games in the comfort of your own home. Unless you're lucky enough to live close to a modern classic arcade. Retro gaming is here to stay, and it won't be going away anytime soon. Cheers for now.